and today I'm discussing a recent Supreme Court case that you might have heard of called Obergefell v. Hodges. It's the case that passed same-sex marriage in all states in the United States. A lot of people remember the verdict when it was decided last June, but most don't actually know the story behind the case. Before I begin discussing it, just to be clear, there were multiple plaintiffs in the case, but since James Obergefell was the named plaintiff, I'll be focusing more on him. While it gained the media's attention last year, James Obergefell had been fighting his case for nearly 2 years before it was brought to the Supreme Court. He and his late husband, John Arthur, began fighting their case in 2013. A few years before, Arthur had been diagnosed with ALS, a horrible disease that affects motor skills and caused Arthur to be bedridden only 2 years after his diagnosis. The couple wanted to marry before he passed, so they flew to Maryland and got married. Obergefell and Arthur filed a lawsuit against the state of Ohio, which the judge accepted and allowed for Obergefell to be listed as Arthur's spouse when he passed away. When Arthur passed, Obergefell received a death certificate with himself listed as a spouse, but the fight wasn't over yet. The Board of Health appealed the court decision that had granted Obergefell to be listed as the spouse on Arthur's death certificate. The case elevated to the circuit courts, and a series of appeals occurred. In November of 2014, the Sixth Circuit Court decided that state bans on same-sex marriage was legal because in the earlier case, Baker v. Nelson. This decision caused a split among circuit courts, elevating the case to the Supreme Court. On April 28, 2015, the plaintiffs and defendants argued their case to the Supreme Court of the United States. Just under 2 months later, on June 26th, the Supreme Court decided in a 5-4 decision that the 14th Amendment required states to grant and recognize same-sex marriage. That was sort of a condensed version of the full case, however. The links in the description contain more info. So you might be wondering, why does it all matter? Well, for one, a ton of people were finally granted the same rights that heterosexual couples never had to fight for. 2, it created more unity in the country, and 3, it upheld the basic principle of equality that America was founded on. I wanted to know the impact that this case had on LGBT people, so I conducted a brief survey to find out. I asked 34 people if they had heard of the case prior to the survey and when they had heard of it. People took the survey and the results were not what I had been expecting. 24 people, or 72%, had heard of it and knew what it was, while 28% did not know what it was. There was a wide variety of responses for when they had heard of it. 38%, which is the majority, said they had heard of it since it began. 29% had not heard of it until the survey. 26% said they had first heard of it when the verdict was announced, and 6% had heard of it at other times. One person said they first heard of it during the federal appeals, and another said that they began following it after it began but before the ruling. I also had the privilege to interview Mr. James Obergefell about his opinions on the case. I asked him how he felt when he found out he won, if the court process was difficult, and if he'd ever thought about giving up. He told me that when he learned he won, he missed his husband more than ever. He also said that he felt more like an equal American than ever. When I asked him if the court process was difficult, he told me that while the process wasn't very difficult, the hardest part for him was waiting. He only spoke in court one time at the beginning of the case, and the other times he was merely a spectator in court. The final question that I asked him was if he had ever considered giving up. He told me that no, he never thought about it. He said he felt a need to keep fighting for his late husband after seeing how well Arthur handled living with ALS. But why does this matter? Before June 26, 2015, members of the LGBT community weren't allowed to have the same rights as straight people. Their marriages weren't recognized nationally as straight ones are. Even after the Supreme Court ruling, people such as Kim Davis worked to deny queer people their rights as U.S. citizens. Throughout our history, we've seen continued oppression and attacks on gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual, and queer people.